More than 52,000 Palestinians have been made homeless and 47,000 have taken refuge at UN-run schools on the Gaza Strip. The humanitarian crisis in the region has sparked great concerns for the international community.
A Gaza girl survived an Israeli strike that shattered her family and home. 6-year-old Susie Eshkuntana woke up alone in Gaza's largest hospital, where she was rushed by rescuers from the ruins of her home. She had been trapped for 7 hours under debris. Her home was destroyed by a pre-dawn Israeli strike that killed her mother and all 4 of her siblings. Susie, covered in dust and too weak to raise her head, wept as she was taken to an ambulance. At another Gaza hospital, 5-month-old Omar was the lone survivor from an Israeli airstrike on May 15 that killed his mother and 4 of his siblings. Health officials said an Israeli airstrike targeted a 3-story building in the Beach refugee camp in Gaza City, killing 8 people, including a woman and her 4 children. Rescue workers were able to recover the infant, who was thrown out of the house. Meanwhile, 8 children in the Gaza Strip lost their lives on Saturday morning while playing at the backyard of their houses when an Israeli airstrike razed a multi-story building in a refugee camp. This sparked outcry for justice among Palestinians. On May 11, dozens of Palestinians took part in a funeral procession for 11-year-old Hussein Hamad, who was killed during the fighting. Mourners chanted and burst into tears as the procession marched through the streets of the northern Gaza town of Beit Hanun.
Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Save the Children, head of the Conflict and Humanitarian Team, James Denselow. James, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Wherever there is conflict, the children suffer, and I would imagine beyond physical injury, the trauma, one can't fully appreciate what that might have long-term psychologically.
Indeed, wherever there is conflict, children will suffer, but especially in parts of the world that have high-density populations of children. And of course, the Gaza Strip may have as many as 2 million people living in it, 50% of whom are children. And of course, we've seen 1 in 3 casualties in this 11-day spasm of violence have been children, 65 killed. We do not know the exact number in terms of those who are wounded, who will suffer lifelong injuries that will change the nature of their lives forever. And then, as you say, there are the invisible wounds, the wounds of the sort of mental health and psychosocial impact of these, of what people saw, what they witnessed, their homes being destroyed, their family members being killed. And of course, we know this because we've seen what happened after similar conflicts in the past. I was looking at a study recently that showed that after a year from the 2014 conflict, we still had high numbers of children who lived in the most intensively hit areas of Gaza suffer from bedwetting, nightmares, and simply unable to move on from what they'd seen and heard.
There may be a ceasefire, but there certainly isn't a return to normality, because most Palestinians are living all the time through abnormal times.
Yes, and I think we can certainly celebrate the fact that there is this ceasefire, and we hope that it will be observed and effective. But yes, Gaza is nothing in the way of normal. It is an incredibly unique environment in the sense of the longevity of what the population there has lived under, whether it's the restriction and blockade of items going in, their inability to move out, and of course these regular bouts of conflict of different levels of intensity. And of course that's the question that will follow this. If the ceasefire does hold, the future of Gaza, what will happen to the population there, what will happen to those children I talked about, what will their future be? And I think this is another opportunity. There have been unfortunately several, whether it's back to 2008, 2011, 2014. And the question is, what will happen this time? What will be different? So the international community was able to come together and put enough pressure on the parties to the conflict to bring about a ceasefire. I guess the question now is, will they be able to address the underlying issues?
And also, I guess, over time, what conflict does is leave a lot of children with either both parents gone, they're orphaned, or they lose a parent, and again, that has a major effect on family life.
Of course, that is something that few of us can imagine ever having to deal with. Yet in Gaza, we saw the stories of entire families being wiped out, or large numbers of siblings of a single family being lost. There was a story of a girl, I think your report mentioned, who'd been under the rubble for 7 hours, survived, and her father survived, but her mother and several of her siblings didn't. And that will, of course, change her life entirely from what the situation was 2 weeks ago. And that's how quickly lives can be affected. And then there's other things, like the fact that so many schools have been damaged, and so many people are now displaced and sheltering within schools. That means that education for a whole generation of Palestinian children has been put on pause, with an uncertainty as to when that would come back online. Already Gaza's schools were under huge amounts of pressure, huge class sizes, shift systems and classes for those kids there. So again, these are all sort of consequences that add together to make childhood so difficult for children in Gaza.
What interventions do you think are absolutely necessary immediately, and what can be helped with, given the circumstances that this territory experiences?
Well, I think, as I say, if we act on the hypothesis that the ceasefire holds, and I think we all hope it will, then I think the first thing is for people to emerge after this sort of 11-day storm of bombs and explosions to really assess the exact nature and scale of the damage. And what will be needed is unfettered access for humanitarians and for aid and for fuel and for medical supplies to be able to get into Gaza to those who need it. And of course, there will be many people who have suffered injuries in Gaza who will not be able to get the treatment to save their eyesight, to save their limbs, to affect their lives for the decades to come. And they need to be allowed to get to the hospitals that will be able to give them that treatment too. So there's a huge amount that needs to happen in the short term. But as I said earlier, there's underlying issues in Gaza that need to be addressed as well. Otherwise, I fear that I will be having the same conversation with you in 2, 4, 5 years' time.
How difficult is it for people like you to do work that you need to do on the ground in Gaza?
Well, I mean, Gaza is a unique challenge, but in many respects it has traditional access positives that other parts of the world don't. I mean, it's very, very hard to operate, for example, in parts of Syria or parts of Yemen, where humanitarian workers are often targeted. I think in Gaza, there is the sort of fundamental access question around the fact that this is a territory that hasn't had the full reconstruction from the last conflict 7 years ago. And so it's much more of a sort of a long-standing issue that the devil is in the detail of bureaucracy and the sort of the nature of what that blockade looks like. So there's organizations like ours that have a decades-long presence in the Gaza Strip, and local staff who have been doing incredible jobs, and hearing from them, speaking to them, hearing their stories of wanting to keep working during this time when they're kind of worried for their own safety. There's been no safe place in Gaza. I think that's worth stressing more than anything. Yet these guys have been working throughout, and they deserve an incredible amount of respect as well as rest when the time comes. So I think there will be lots and lots of work to do, and I think we stand ready to do it, as I'm sure the entire humanitarian community does. And that's if, of course, this ceasefire holds.
Has it been difficult to get humanitarian aid into Gaza? And with a ceasefire, one hopes that it will become a bit easier.
Yes, I mean, I think there's been brief moments of access across. There's only a few crossings from Israel and from Egypt. Those unfortunately have been quickly closed down due to being caught up in the violence. I was hearing today that at one crossing point they were expecting 25 trucks to go across, only 5 did. And of course, there's the sort of regular supply that Gaza needs to sustain itself, particularly fuel. When you think about the hospitals and the sort of precarious nature of those hospitals and the ability for them to keep operating. But then there's, on top of all that kind of day-to-day pre-conflict necessities, there's all the necessities that have been added by what's happened over the last 11 days. And to be honest, we don't know that full picture until the dust clears from an end of the fighting. So I think we can predict that there's going to be a lot that's going to be needed, and therefore that unfettered aid point and unfettered access point is crucial. But only in the next few days will we really know the full scale of things.
All right, so we're focusing on Gaza and we're focusing on the children there, but I'm just curious as well, just across the border, you've got Israeli children who are hearing rockets being fired, 3,150, I believe, in the past week. That too must play into the lives of children there.
Of course, and 2 children killed in southern Israel, absolutely unacceptable. And we've condemned this rocket fire. It's indiscriminate. It hits schools, it hits homes, and of course, it has resulted in children dying. And then, let alone the fact that you've got children living under those missiles. You look at the positives. Thankfully, there are air raid shelters. There are sort of systems that have helped take those rockets down. But still, you're never going to sort of condone acts of violence against children. And I think it is important to be very conscious of what happened there.
All right, James, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very, very much indeed for helping us tell this difficult story. Often children who suffer a great deal and don't quite have a voice to express themselves. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.
All right, that's James Denselow speaking to us about the challenges that children are facing, particularly in Gaza at this time. But as I said, a ceasefire has been agreed. That'll kick in 2 hours' time now, 2 a.m. In the Israeli-Palestinian time. And there are hopes that it will hold after 11, 12 days of serious conflict that has seen thousands and thousands of people left homeless, hundreds killed, injured, and loss of life on both sides of this conflict.